Hey, sixth graders, how you doing? Today we're going to start our unit on the Middle Ages. Exciting times. We're now in the correct time sequence, and we're going to look at the geographic and cultural factors that shaped Europe leading into the Middle Ages. Let's just talk a little bit about the geography of Europe. We've talked quite a bit about Southern Europe with the Balkan and Peloponnesian Peninsula here with Greece and the Italian Peninsula here with the Roman Empire. Now we're going to go above the Alps right here and into parts of Eastern, Central, and Western Europe. Let's first look at the continent itself. If you look at Europe, it's really shouldn't be considered a separate continent, but it is. And why is that? Because it's part of a bigger continent. It's still connected to the Asian plate. So, really, the big landmass is not so much Asia and Europe, it's one continent altogether, a supercontinent called Eurasia. Myasia? No, Eurasia. But for the modern interpretation of Europe as a separate continent, let's look at its boundaries. First, if you look at this mountain range right here, that's the Ural Mountains that are in Russia. So, if you are in Eastern Russia, you're in Asia. If you're in Western Russia, you are in Europe. And if you look here, the Black Sea is kind of seen as the other dividing line in the east for Europe. So right here is kind of the natural dividing line of Europe and Asia. To the south, as you know, is the Mediterranean Sea, the world's largest sea. Then we have to the east the Atlantic Ocean, and multiple seas that connect into that, like the Baltic Sea right here, the English Channel, the North Sea, and then above that we have right here by where Iceland is, and bordering the Scandinavian countries right here is the Arctic Ocean. So that's the boundaries naturally of Europe. In Europe, they have a generally temperate climate, meaning they have all four seasons, and they have a lot of rivers because of the mountains right here, and here, and here, that allow them to have a lot of natural water resources into the area, and this is going to make Europe great for farmland, which is going to be great in the Middle Ages because a lot of people are going to live as farmers. Um, Even during the Roman Empire, most people living north of the Alps, not living in the areas of Greece and Italy, um, lived in small, isolated farming villages or nomadic tribes. Um, and after the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, that stabilizing force that the Roman Empire had, even though they're still pretty isolated in parts of this, that stabilization of infrastructure the Romans brought kind of brings everything to a halt. And all the advances in technology, education, and culture that came with the Roman Empire also were lost. If you look here, you can see people working pretty hard as farmers outside of a castle, which will be where the lord or the nobility who own the land will live. And most of the other people will be out here basically working just to make enough to feed themselves and to keep them rich. And next door to the castle is, of course, the cathedral, which is where all the real power is held during the Middle Ages. Middle Ages last for about 1,000 years, from 500 CE to 1500 CE. Um, and we call it the Middle Ages because it's in the middle of two other major time periods, the Roman Empire and the Renaissance, which are really going to shape life in Europe. The term Middle Age also is often referred to as the medieval age or medieval time. Medieval comes from the Latin words for Middle Ages. So, that's why when you go to medieval times, you're celebrating people dressed up like knights having fake battles. You know what? I don't care. It's pretty awesome. You get to eat food with your hands. It's fantastic. Anyway, Europe is also divided into smaller kingdoms, and these we're going to see that eventually during the later Middle Ages, that these smaller kingdoms are going to eventually start to connect into one another and make nation states like for example France and Spain and England. Um, Throughout this time period of the Middle Ages, the dominant real center of power will be the Roman Catholic Church. We're going to see that more and more the Catholic Church, because it was established by the Roman Empire, is still going to maintain a very powerful presence throughout all of European societies. And generally speaking, if you were a average person living in Europe during the Middle Ages, your life was pretty short and difficult. Your lifespan was, generally into your late 30s, early 40s. If you made it that far, you're pretty lucky. Well, let's talk about one lucky guy during the Middle Ages, and this fella right here named Charlemagne, who you read about in the article. Charlemagne it was Frankish, meaning that he was from the border of northern France and Belgium today. And he is a pretty good conqueror and starts setting about conquering good chunks of present day Central and Eastern Europe, parts of present day Germany, Austria, Hungary, parts of present day Italy and France. And he was a pretty religious guy, and he forms an alliance with the Pope. And when we say the Pope, you might recall, is a title given to the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. Catholics see the Pope as being chosen by God to rule over the people. They're the Holy See. They see for God on earth. And the Pope, not every Pope was necessarily real popular, and the Pope at the time, Pope Leo III, is attacked by the people of Rome, and they throw him out there, frustrated with him. But Charlemagne basically returns him back to Rome, returns him back to the Vatican, returns him to power. And as an exchange for doing that, the Pope crowns Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor. And this is going to set an important precedent that the Pope will be basically a kingmaker in Rome. That you can't really sit in the highest places of power unless the Pope says so. You need the Pope's blessing. And you can see that this king almost is looking religious. Has a cross on his scepter. He's holding symbols of faith and royalty combined. So that as the Holy Roman Empire and Holy Roman Emperor, Charlemagne sets about promoting the church throughout Europe. And the Romans definitely did a good deal to spread Christianity, but Charlemagne does quite a bit as well. He does this by trying to make the church more strong, have a stronger infrastructure throughout parts of Europe. Uses a good deal of his conquest to build cathedrals. This is another big precedent that he'll set, in that cathedrals are going to become the center of European villages and cities, and really the center of localized power, because the church holds all the power in these cathedrals, which are designed to look like, heaven on earth, especially for people who live in a farm on a field, digging through mud all day, dealing with disease and all these other things. Stepping into church was like stepping into heaven on earth. The cathedrals were these otherworldly places that took hundreds of years to build. So Charlemagne sets up the precedent for cathedral building. He's going to expand education because he believes that the clergy need to be the most educated. So he really expands education for the clergy. And we're going to see that that's going to have another precedent, that the real center of knowledge in Europe was pretty much held as a monopoly by the church. Most of the people that were literate, who could read, who could write, who had access to books from Greece and Rome, the church were the sole purveyors of knowledge, and Charlemagne helped set that up. But he helped spread Christianity through the sword. He conquers people and says, "I'm your ruler now. You're going to worship this, or you'll die." And so there's definitely going to be some lasting legacies throughout the rest of the Middle Ages, thanks to Charlemagne. After his death, the Holy Roman Empire is going to fracture into smaller kingdoms, and eventually we'll see that some of these smaller kingdoms are going to break into some of the nations that we know today. So, what long-term effects did the rule of Charlemagne have on European history is my question for you today for your first Middle Ages lesson. Thanks for watching. Happy Tuesday!